Hello and good afternoon and good evening, or namaste from the UK. We have a webinar this time is actually on culturally appropriate psychological help and support in India. And welcome you all to the webinar, for the MeHeLP webinar in June. And we have our guest for the session, Ms. Signa Mishra. I will introduce Mrs. Mishra in a minute, but let me just talk more about what we are trying to do in terms of the MeHeLP project and what the project actually entails in terms of mental health literacy in India. So let me introduce myself. I'm Raghu Raghavan. I'm a professor of mental health at De Montfort University in Leicester in the UK. And I lead a project funded by the UK Research Council on mental health literacy in rural and urban communities in Kerala in India. And why we are actually focusing on Kerala in this project is because of the fact that the Human Health Index of Kerala is in par with the rest of the so-called developed world. But the mental illness is pretty high. The prevalence of mental illness in India is very high in comparison to some of the other Indian states, according to the National Mental Health Survey of India. That is the reason why we are actually focusing on Kerala. So this project actually looks at mental health literacy from a culturally constructed perspective and how culture influences mental health help seeking. And we are actually using creative methodologies to actually engage with rural, urban, and tribal communities through the use of theater, films, and other mediums. So we have been doing this project since September 2018, and we are due for completion by the end of October this year. So we've also been linking up with a number of therapists throughout India, educational institutions and other NGOs throughout India in terms of communicating the message of mental health literacy and also engaging with professionals and NGOs to promote the message of mental health literacy. More importantly, culturally constructed mental health literacy, I must say. So the project has a number of partners from the UK. There are other partners from the same universities and also from Loughborough University. And also we have partners from University College London and also from Excavate Theatre Group in Nottingham, and also Middlesex University in London. In India, we have worked with the Tata Institute of Social Sciences and the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences for this project. And we also work with two NGO organizations based in Kerala, the Mental Health Action Trust and the MeHeLP Foundation. And also work with Logadamni, the theatre group based in Cochin in Kerala. So that's in a nutshell in terms of our partners. We have been actively engaging with various communities and we are in the process of actually developing further theatre engagement through digitally or other ways, and also the films in terms of communicating the message of mental health literacy from our data sets. So why mental health literacy? Mental health literacy is not just mental health awareness. It is much more than that. So it's actually, and also culture plays a major role in terms of how we shape up mental health literacy and our help seeking. So mental health literacy has 6 arms. I think I must also add a 7th arm to it. The first one is actually our ability to recognize specific disorders or different types of psychological distress. And secondly, it's about knowledge about risk factors and causes. And thirdly, it's about knowledge about self-help interventions. And fourthly, it's about knowledge about professional help and available. And attitudes which facilitate and promote the help of recognition of distress and illness, which involves stigma and other aspects. And sixthly, about knowledge about how to seek mental health information in the right source, because there are a lot of misinformation about mental health and mental illness, and what is the right kind of information, and how does one actually go about doing that. And we would also add a 7th element to this to the Western notion of what we call mental health literacy, is actually how does people culturally construct mental health literacy in the context, in this particular context, in the Indian setting, really. Because low mental health literacy is always associated with more stigmatizing attitudes, and hence people don't actually seek help. And that's the reason why mental health literacy is more important. It is not just awareness, it's a full spectrum of help and support that is actually available to all communities. So it is actually in this context that we are planning to organize this webinar. And we are very grateful to Snigdha Mishra to be our chief guest in this webinar to discuss culturally appropriate psychological help and support in India. So welcome to the program, Snigdha, and we normally have a conversation for about an hour or so with interactive sessions. We also take audience questions and try and answer them spontaneously as well. So let's see how things go around.
All right, but thank you so much for having me here. And,
yeah, let me just introduce you. Let me just introduce you first. Okay. Snigdha Mishra is a psychotherapist and a mental health educator. She is the founder of Life Surface, and the founder member of the Bharatiya Counselling Psychology Association and Let's Talk, which is the COVID mental health crisis support helpline. So through Life Surface, she is actively engaged in a passion project of trained mental health peer support. That's the peer mental health first aid in college campuses and workplaces across India. She actively believes and works towards capacity building for improving mental health care gap in India, therefore focuses on community-based tertiary mental health support systems through training of laypersons in mental health support skills and education and development of skills in psychologists. Her core work areas are training of laypersons in mental health support skills and counseling, and psychologist education, and improving young adult mental health with a focus on upskilling mental well-being by enhancing emotional and behavioral health and psychoeducation, and improving mental health literacy, nurturing safe spaces, and providing trained mental health peer support, and improving help-seeking behavior. And she's also she's training and expertise in cognitive and rational emotive therapies and clinical hypnotherapy. Snigdha has training in CBT from the Beck Institute in Philadelphia, USA, and is a certified corporate responsibility trainer from the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs under the Ministry of Corporate Affairs in India. Snigdha is an avid reader, a music lover, a passionate cook, and a social activist. She actively supports capacity building and awareness on gender equality and mental health. She runs a mental well-being YouTube channel to help build awareness on connecting mental health and quality of life. So a very warm welcome to you, Snigdha, to this program on our discussion, on active live discussion on mental health literacy and how culturally constructed mental health literacy would look like in the Indian context. So warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. We will start with a kind of a 5-minute pitch from Snigdha about the culturally appropriate psychological help and support in India. So over to you, Snigdha.
Okay. Thank you, MeHeLP, and thank you, Dr. Raghu, for having me here. And what I should start with is that when you look at mental health as a concept, we ideally, in normal conversation, when we speak of mental health, we immediately jump to concluding it to be illness. We conclude and identify with psychiatric help, with medication, with institutionalization. We use derogatory terms like pagal, mad, and whatever other colloquial local language one may use to say that someone's gone crazy. Okay, you've got bonkers, or you've gone cuckoo, whatever you want to call it, right? Now, the idea of mental health, as you rightly said, is a lot more, right? We all know that mental health is a huge spectrum which involves a lot of our relationship, how healthy our emotional health, our behavioral health, how we relate to the people around us in terms of work, our family system, whether we are able to lead a productive, reasonably happy and rational life, uh, you know, uh, in different significant areas, be it how we identify politics, how we identify our work, our social interactions, and our our economics. When I say economics, it means not just nation building, but the idea of your community, what you're able to contribute or not, and how, and so on and so forth. And then yes, one part of it is the illness, which is of course diagnosable medical illnesses that come as we call it as mental illnesses, right? But that's a small part of it. There's a huge gamut of it that involves people's interactions. And when we talk about people's interactions, it is impacted by the region, the area where they live, whether, let's say, whether they're living in Gurgaon, which is urban, or whether they're living in the outskirts of Gurgaon, and small pockets in Gurgaon, which are not as urban, or whether they're in rural UP, right? Or which city and area of UP they are in, or whether they're in Kerala, or whether they're in Maharashtra, or a tribal MP or Chhattisgarh, right? So all of this will impact what their mental health is. Okay, I'll give you a very, very interesting thought that I had this morning, and I wanted to write about it, but I wanted to research before write. But I'm going to state this here because I think it's an appropriate example that we talk about workplace mental health. But when we look at it, and again, this is what cultural appropriateness means, that when you look at it, in India as a nation which is so wide, and you have all kinds of working cultures here, you're looking at a corporate culture of workplace. But what about the blue collar workers? What about millions that work in our factories, in our PSUs? Right? What does accessible mental health care mean to them? And forget accessible mental health. What does understanding, or what does mental health literacy mean for them? Would they ever be able to go and seek help if they don't even identify and know what it means to have depression? Or whether what they're experiencing is substance abuse, right? Why? Because in some parts it's acceptable. For example, I remember I was very young when I'd traveled to Bihar, and Bihar they drink tari, right? And that's their local drink. That's their local alcoholic drink, which comes from a tree, right? And depending on what time of the day you're picking the fruit up and how you ferment it, how you're using it, it becomes alcoholic or non-alcoholic. But that's their staple drink. And that's huge over there, and a huge substance abuse problem. But because it is culturally appropriate for them to have tari, and a lot of them are not going to their work, they're missing out on work, they're going back home and probably beating up their wives. Domestic abuse, we know by research, is more in households where there is no substance abuse, right? How do you make them understand that this is a mental health problem? Okay, and no matter, even if it is culturally acceptable to drink, the difference between social drinking and abusive drinking, and how that is impacting not just your livelihood, but your own life and that of the community itself. And that is what cultural appropriateness means in the context of mental health. For example, if I'm a therapist, yes, I reside in an urban area, but when I'm doing trainings with, let's say, community health workers of Jharkhand, Bihar, and Uttar Pradesh, and training them for certain crisis intervention skill sets for mental health, I need to understand that, yes, they're community health workers, and what is okay to experience or not okay to experience within their area of residence. How religion impacts their conversation, how gender impacts their conversation, and therefore how their existence within their communities impacts their mental health. And that is what being culturally appropriate means. And I often say this, that I have been born and brought up in an urban setup, and so have my parents. So the idea of what semi-urban and rural India goes through, the awareness of it, the understanding of it, that how deep-rooted concepts of religion, caste, politics, governance, all of this are within the rural setup, came to me very late, even though politics and history were a huge part of discussion in my family while I was growing up. But so I was sensitive to it, but I never understood it before, maybe 3 or 4 years now. So that's the idea. That's why the narrative needs to shift. And let's say I am trained in CBT. Okay, let's say I am a rationalist. And how do I help someone who feels absolutely hopeless and therefore finds no meaning and purpose in life, and therefore has suicidal ideation and wants to die? But that person is very religious. And let's say, for example, as a therapist, I am not religious. I don't believe in the concept of God. How do I use that person's idea of God and belief in God to help them while being in my CBT psychotherapeutic framework, using all the logic and rationale and psychotherapy with him, but helping him move out from the zone that he is in to a more healthy understanding of life and finding purpose somewhere else, using probably his idea of God, even though I don't believe in it, right? Understanding what his cultural background is, what his religious background is, what his gender struggles have been. And when I say gender, I mean across the binary and not just male or female. And that is for me the idea of cultural proclivities, that we have to shift. We have to understand that mental health is not an urban need, it's a human need. So wherever there are human beings, they will have impact on their mental health depending upon on their community, on their life experiences. And let's say if I talk about myself, I as a therapist need to be sensitive to them, right? So if I'm speaking to somebody from, let's say, a town like, let's say, Basti, which is in UP, it's a small town ahead of Ayodhya. How do I speak with that person? What language do I speak in? And when I say language, it's not Hindi or English. It's the human language, the emotional expression, the intellectual expression, the social expression. How do I use that? Yeah. So I don't know if I've taken more than 5 minutes to explain myself, but that's the idea. And with my organization, that's what I've been trying to do. I've always been a clinician, but it's only lately that I've started now actively working around areas of building community mental health systems. And therefore, we worked hard on developing the peer mental health first aid concept, which is different from the regular mental health first aid. Because I realized that in a country like India, you cannot just limit help to identifying mental health issues, which the typical mental health first aid model does. No, we are so inbuilt within our social structures for support that we need to find that support from within our community. So the peer mental health first aid does exactly that it gives that initial support for a couple of meetings where the person is trained enough to at least not give counseling, not be a therapist, not be a doctor, not make a diagnosis, but be able to just, help the person understand that, okay, this is what you're experiencing. Therefore, this might be a little bit dysfunctional. And of course, dysfunctional is a therapeutic term. You don't use that in common, normal language. But because you have had these problems, maybe this is the time for you to seek professional help, and that what is going to be, the most appropriate professional help, like the 5-6 pillars of mental health literacy that you give. I'm so happy that the peer mental health first aid training has all of them, and yeah. And the idea is also to foster and create those safe spaces within these smaller communities, like workplaces, like colleges, like peer support groups, so that people can be trained to offer this support, where you're clear that they're not giving psychotherapeutic support. They're not these listening circles and stuff like that. They've been trained to offer that initial support for someone who's either experiencing a mental health problem, including an illness. how to identify what the problem is, and then mitigate initially, and then help them go to the right, either the therapist or psychiatrist or the institution, wherever, right? So it becomes like this sustainable system within itself. We can't wait for India to have enough psychiatrists or enough psychologists or enough, psychiatric social workers. And also we have the medical care model of the mental health. We don't have the mental health care model. We even though it is called the Mental Health Care Act, it is a Mental Illness Care Act, right?
Yes.
So you have to shift that narrative. So we have to create programs where the community is involved in taking care of each other, because we are that culture. We are those people that seek support from our people. And then what better to train our people to give help? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I think that is beautifully put. Very up to the point, spot on, Snigdha, in terms of why we are focusing too much on the illness model and not on the health model of mental health and well-being, really. And I think, as you rightly said, we have in some way forgotten the cultural perspectives of how to engage with people who might require some help and support. Some require some intense therapy, etc., but some may not require some minor, as you say, safe spaces for people to communicate their distress in many ways. But I think somehow it seems to be more medicalized these days. Everything is actually very medicalized. So how do we kind of work within the system in relation to trying to provide a more humanistic, more user-friendly kind of therapeutic mode?
Okay. So in order to provide a more user-friendly therapy mode, first we need to work around a narrative. What is the narrative that we are building? For example, now, and rightfully so, it was high time that in India, the conversations around mental health have increased manifold, right? So who are these people who are making the conversations first? That's very important. People have a problem that psychologists, psychiatrists, or mental health professionals, or people with lived experience are the only ones who should talk about it. And I say no. I personally have a problem when influencers and coaches talk about mental health, but they give inaccurate information. And they offer help, which they should not. But mental health is a conversation for common dining table conversations between people of all kinds. The narrative should not be held only by immediate service takers, which is people who are going through the problem, or the caregivers, which includes the family, or the service providers, which are the mental health professionals. So the narrative has to move from all of these to general public. It has to be part of public discourse. When you make it a part of public discourse, your interpretation of therapy changes. Okay, and I'll tell you how that changes. If I, not if I am, I am a hardcore feminist. All right. Anybody who talks to me within maybe half, if they can bear to spend half an hour with me talking, they will know that the couple of things that I'm deeply passionate about life in, which is, and through my narrative, they would know that, okay, I'm a feminist. I enjoy food. I am, let's say, crazy about my Avadi style of biryani and korma. Or let's say I'm a makeup junkie, and I'm insanely passionate about the work that I do. I can talk about mental health from hours together, and I'm sure it's very apparent to everybody who's listening. Now, this is what you hear from me, about me, and interpret from me during my conversation with you. How do I, as a therapist, then interpret, let's say, the same thing about someone who's sitting in front of me? And I tweak my therapy or my understanding of a westernized form of therapy and use that on the person. How I develop depending on the need of that person, my own interpretation of that therapy to help the person. It doesn't mean that I'm going out of context. I'm going to use it with my population, right?
Yeah.
And that is where cultural therapeutic shift needs to come. And that can only come when I'm sensitive and I look at it from the humanistic perspective and not from a treatment perspective. Because when you look at treatment, you're looking at a set of symptoms and a set of diagnoses and how they interplay in the person's life, right? I hope that does answer your question. It was a very, very lengthy answer.
No,
I
I
hope
think
it does.
yeah, I think it's important. I think you put the therapist's perspective quite very well in terms of how the therapist must be actually looking at those things and addressing those issues. You also touched on an important point of about the public discourse on mental health,
Yes.
which is, I think, is mostly important, not just in the Indian context, also throughout the world from the global perspective as well. Because we only see the negative images of mental illness or mental health conditions, not necessarily the day-to-day things that everybody goes through. We all go through the stress and trauma on a day-to-day basis, morning and afternoon and at night. But I think it's one as to how one survives and how one comfortably travels through those stress and strain is what constructs the mental health of oneself. And I think the public perspective is that obviously you only look at the extreme cases of illness mode, and I think it's important that we have the public the public health services. I think there should be a need for a public mental health service in the Indian context and also from a global perspective as well. What are your thoughts on that?
I quite agree to it. We've been in India trying to build that since the 1980s. We have the national mental health policy, we have the state mental health policy and the state chapters and stuff like that. But I am very, very unsure actually of what's happening again at the ground level. Okay. And why again we need to shift it. I'll give you a very small example. While growing up, there was this Amitabh Bachchan and Amjad Khan movie called Yarana. Okay, very, very famous movie. Amazing songs, Adi Barman, Kishore Kumar, whatever. And there was a scene, there's a part in the movie where Amitabh Bachchan goes to a mental institution, right? And I don't know how many people remember that movie. I do. And we loved that movie as children. Now, and I'm also giving this example because MeHeLP works through cinema, through art, and through theater. And these are pleasurable activities, right? Watching a movie is pleasurable. Listening to a song is pleasurable. And that stays in your head. And that's conditioning. It's also cultural. And it comes from cinema. It comes from a song. So Amitabh Bachchan is an institution. And what does the institution look like? As someone would say, pagal. Crazy people live there. So there are bars and, it's like a jail and there are people who are behaving weirdly and, screaming and shouting and violent and this, that, and electric shock and stuff like that. And not just in that one movie, in a lot of movies, right? When you see that, you accept that because you don't know any better. You haven't been taught any better. And you don't even know where to look for better information, because that's the narrative that has been shown to you and built in front of you for many, many years. So you're not literate enough around it, right? And that's the answer. You're not literate enough around it. So when that happens, there is a mental health policy on what you can and cannot show on television. I was seeing a Mexican drama and similar stuff. The drama was amazing, but I kind of lost interest in the second season because they show one of the protagonists as having some form of schizophrenia. There was no diagnosis, and she was constantly being labeled as being dangerous for people. She's going to kill people, and she's crazy. And they're telling the other people that, okay, you didn't know what your sister was, and she was this crazy person who could do anything to harm the other person. She was conniving, she was this. And in my head, I'm thinking, the dude If you're shown a diagnosis, she's ill. You don't go around labeling someone who has diabetes. You don't go around labeling someone who has cancer or a heart ailment. They have the medication for years together. They've been asked to do lifestyle modifications for years together. You don't do that, but you label someone who has a mental illness, right? Also, because you don't see it as the concept of health. You see it as a concept of somebody going cuckoo in the head and bonkers, right? So when somebody goes bonkers, what does it mean? It means that it's out of the norm. So when you talk about the public health system, but the public health system needs to have programs on awareness like we have on HIV India, the HIV program in India, the tuberculosis program in India, the polio program in India. I mean, come on. We won over polio. We're doing some amazing work for HIV. Do you think we as a nation are incapable of talking about mental health? We are not. We are not incapable, but we're not doing enough.
Yeah.
We're not putting it in the right perspective and putting enough effort on it.
Yeah. I think that's maybe rightly said in relation to many of the things in terms of public health, and also why we don't actually equate mental health and mental health conditions in relation to some of the physical context and health as well. So, but I think from a wider perspective, it's there are lots of myths around mental health conditions and not about mental health, because people don't know what the mental health is all about.
Yes.
They know more about the mental health conditions. Maybe they don't. By speaking to many of the students in India, I talk about what is mental health. They tell me definitions about what is mental illness. So that, which means to say that people don't know what is mental health.
Yeah, or they Google quickly the WHO definition.
No, I think it's more about, because the other day somebody actually asked me, sent me a WhatsApp text, I think, and asking him, how do I construct mental health? And I have actually provided a very detailed way of actually, all the life cycle and then diet and everything else, your mindset and everything else is included in that kind of context. So I think people are not aware of it, or they take it for granted, or they are not actually reflecting on some of the how they actually construct some of those things. Because we have spoken to it in some of other projects that we have actually done with some of the marginalized communities in India. We've done some projects with slum dwelling community in Pune. We didn't talk to them about mental illness. We talked to them about resilience. How is it that they construct resilience in the midst of adversities? And beautiful narratives, layers of narratives of how they've actually are fighting their life in one piece. And they haven't had any psychological help, no psychiatry help, but they're able to construct their resilience. So they're able to understand that inner happiness and inner health and inner meaning of how one goes through. I'm not actually generalizing it, but the stories that we have from those individuals. But as I think sometimes we are externalizing some of those things and not looking at it from the wider cultural perspective. So obviously that could be an issue. That's where I think you mentioned about the kind of safe spaces where we actually provide more information to people, especially young people, schools, and employers and employer contexts, etc., whereby there is an opportunity to understand more about the well-being concept.
That brings us to investment and money. Investment in mental health.
Yes,
right?
Yes, that's true.
Because the outcome is very difficult to measure. Although I don't agree to it, I really don't agree to it. The outcome is technically, or it's not ideal. Outcome calculation, like 2 + 2 is equal to 4. If you're investing 5 rupees, you're getting like 5 rupees worth or 10 rupees worth. That's not there. It's quality. It's a lot of it has to do with qualitative understanding. Businesses don't invest in mental health. And when I say businesses don't invest in mental health, I'm not talking about these hundreds of portals that have suddenly come up. No, that's another thing. That's another story of another time. The idea that as an organization, and here I am talking all kinds of organizations, okay? are you really mentally healthy? Okay, organizations that employ psychologists themselves have toxic work environment. That's the latest complaint that we've had, and since the past 6 months, we've been talking to a lot of therapists, and in fact, now through Life Surfers, we started a safe space conversation for therapists in COVID times. We started Therapist Collective, which is a fortnightly forum where therapists come and talk. So the idea is, why are people not investing in mental health? Where you read a report by United for Mental Health, it's a London-based NGO. I'm forgetting their full name. I think it's Global United for Mental Health, or I think United for Global Mental Health. United for Global Mental Health. It's a London-based organization, and they have this amazing criteria of calculating investment in mental health per person per capita, depending on the revenue that your company makes, what that person does, and what their role within the organization is, what their CTC is, and sick days and mental health days and stuff like that, and how your investment in that person can actually increase if you're putting a certain amount of money in making sure that your work environment is healthy. And when you talk about work environment, it is about the policies of leave, policies around the number of work, the number of hours of work, whether you have flexi work or whether you have flexi commutation. And when I say flexi commutation, the idea which is working now, which is amazing, is that you want to work from home or you want to work from an office space. Where do you want to work? Do you have to come to office every day? Do you have to move out of the comfort of your family home to a city like Gurgaon or Bombay and struggle? Or you can easily be in Kerala in your home with your parents and work from there. Yes, maybe your dearness allowance might be maybe 10% lower because you're not living in a city like Bombay, but maybe some other, a smaller city. But are you okay paying that price of a 10% lesser dearness allowance? Maybe. Right?
Yeah.
So small changes in these kind of policies, and that makes for investment. Investment is not just about putting a certain amount of money. It's also about the culture that you're creating, the perspective that you're creating. If you have a bandwidth of 5,000 employees and you have an EAP system which is not working because people are not going to therapists through the EAP, what do you do? Can you not do like a training like a PMFHA in your I'm not pitching PMFHA, but I'm just saying that can you not do like a regular mental health literacy program where you, for everybody, if you have 5,000 people divided, all 5,000 people should be mentally should have gone through that mental health literacy program to understand what they're going through and what their immediate peer at the workplace might be going through. Why not? It doesn't take much.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's very true. I think in terms of the investment, resource investment, and not in terms of just the money, and also in terms of training, in terms of understanding, in terms of the safe spaces, in terms of support models. I think some of it doesn't actually cost money. Some of it actually requires a lateral thinking, the way we organize things, really.
Yeah.
So I think, the resource, I think the investment of resources in mental health and well-being, and also especially in the employment context, and also the public health services, is actually not up to the mark at the moment.
They're not up to the mark.
No. So can I now shift to another mode of discussion in terms of belief systems, because belief systems actually religious beliefs and other belief systems influence the way we look at mental illness, and also mental health. There are positive effects, there are maybe some negative effects as well. So can we shift our conversation to that, as to how belief systems might be as a helpful factor, because we kind of believe in multiple mental health literacies, because obviously mental health, other things such as the belief systems can be helpful in many contexts, because it actually provides more meaning and a purpose in life, along with the help and support from psychiatrists and the psychologists and other people as well. So I think it's how people construct all these things together. How do they see it all in the holistic kind of context? So what's your your thoughts on that? And after that, I think we will take some questions from the audience immediately after that. So if there are questions related, then please do raise your questions in the Q&A chat box.
So of course, your belief systems do play a huge role. And India is generally a very highly religious nation, right? So hope, okay, is related with God. When you become hopeless, when you become helpless, in a good way, it helps you sustain. It helps you build that coping, build that resilience. कि भगवान की इच्छा है, भगवान ने ऐसा किया. And if you're someone who's very, very religious, then you would let God take his course. And that's how you generate hope. So in that context, religion can be extremely good, right? But on the hindsight, the same belief can stop you from taking appropriate medical care because you don't see that as a mental care need or medical care need. You see that as Bhagwan ka kiya. Pichle janam ka paap. Sorry, I'm going into Hindi, into some karma or some past life, something, some sin that has come, and therefore this person has developed into this maniacal, mad, pagal person or whatever, not realizing that that's not it. They've developed a mental illness probably, right? So there's a good and a bad to everything. There's a pro and con here. You look at belief systems around gender, okay? Like, let's say in urban area, there's a lot of conversation now, happily so, happening around gender mental health, including men and women mental health, and that across binaries, right? Yes, there is still a lot of stigma. We're still a patriarchal system. We're still are very, very negative and extremely hostile towards the LGBTQI community. But yes, there's some change that has happened over a period of time. So again, coming to gender, it's acceptable that women are vulnerable, okay? Because they're seen as these, entities to protect, and they're fragile, and because they're women. Well, and what then it does is, of course, it's extremely impolite to label and judge women as that, because it's a human thing. It's not a woman or a man thing. What it does is it looks down upon women who are independent and who are strong and who are ambitious, and who would typically be termed as she is the man of the house. She doesn't need to be the man of the house. She's just a woman. You don't need to be a man to be ambitious, right? So you are invalidating the human experience. And you do the same to a man when you say that he cannot be vulnerable, that he has to be the strong, this person, right? He has to be the pillar of support. He can't cry when his father dies. Boys don't cry. Or, men are aggressive, the boys are going to be boys. You're not letting them develop as human beings. You're curbing them because you're identifying them in boxes. And the same thing you do with any other gender. A boy is supposed to be a boy, could not wear a skirt. Now, even he's a boy, he identifies as a boy, but he likes to wear a skirt. Now, you look at southern India, wear lungis, right? Almost like a skirt. You come to a culture in Bihar and UP, lungi becomes a tehmad. It's that checkered thing, a piece of cloth that you wear almost like a lungi. It's called a tehmad, Then the style of sari wearing that women wear down south, you remove the palla from it and it becomes a dhoti for men, right? So if we give logic to the belief systems, we will identify whether these belief systems are rational and helpful or they're irrational, and we try them and change them, right? So yes, belief systems influence our health seeking. They influence how we look at people. They can be productive, and they can be utterly thwarting for not just individuals, for communities to grow.
Yeah,
and that's why when we talk about mental health, we need to talk about mental health and not mental illness.
Exactly.
We have to depathologize conversations, deconstruct the notion of illnesses from it, and we have to look at it from a human experience and quality of life experience. And when we look at it from a humanistic and quality of life perspective, then all of these things come at play. And the illness is moved out. Not that it is invalidated. No, of course it is not. But it is not just about the illness. So you have to move out from the illness conversation. And you have to move out of no harm against policymakers and psychiatrists, absolutely not. But you have to not just call policymakers and psychiatrists for discussion. You have to call therapists, you have to call people with lived experience, you have to call caregivers, you have to call civil society for discussion on any panel that happens around mental health policy, health seeking. And that's how the narratives are going to shift.
Yeah, I think so, very much so. I think that's where culture and cultural heritage actually gives a lot of meaning for people. It gives for people, there is something to hang on, even when they're actually consulting therapists and medical practitioners.
Yes.
There is something for people to hang on to in the sense that it gives them a clear purpose. It gives them comfort. It gives them a space. So a lot of advantages to it, rather than actually poo-pooing all those things. That is important that we look at it more, more part of the treatment approach itself, part of the intervention approach itself.
You have to use it as part of the treatment, as you said. Use this as part of therapy, as part of the caregiving model, rather than looking at it. And that's why educating oneself about it is important. If I'm not educated as a therapist, and I'm 100% sure that there are so many concepts that I don't know and that I need to learn, and that I probably am not even cognizant about, forget knowledge, right? I'm not even aware. And that's where that role of cultural sensitivity comes in.
Yeah, and also from the therapist side, sorry to interrupt, from the therapist perspective, also for the therapist to actually have the confidence that to explore some of those cultural perspectives is also very important, because the therapist is actually saying that the culture doesn't play a role, then obviously they don't actually go into those kind of realms. In the West, we have a concept whereby many of the psychiatrists and psychologists, they stay away from the cultural thing. They purely concentrate on the symptomatology, but then they miss the story. They miss the story about the person.
They will. They're bound to miss the story. They're bound to miss it.
Yes, that's right.
The story.
Yes, that's exactly. Yes, that's right. I think we need
if you don't recognize it, you're going to completely miss it. And how the culture is involved in making the person who they are is part of their being. Yeah, it's part of who they are. You cannot dissociate it. And that's exactly what my actual problem is with looking at it from a medical model. And anybody who looks at it from a medical model is going to have this problem. It's plain and simple.
Yeah. I think that's why we have major issues purely focusing on the symptomatology and not looking at the person as a whole, person with a family, and there are issues around the person. I think we need to look at very much from a holistic perspective. I'm not going into the psychosocial dimension, more holistically. Is the only word that I can actually find that really. So there are some questions that has actually come up from our discussion. I think the second one, we do not provide a certificate. I'm sorry, we can't provide a certificate for this webinar. But second question by Ajay Chandra, has the NMHP 2017 and DMHP been forthcoming for private-public partnership, especially in the rural pockets of India? Could you throw some insight into the field?
Can you repeat the question, please? I lost it there, so I didn't hear.
It's actually in the Q&A box.
In the chat box? Oh, it's in the Q&A box.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Has what's coming for private-public partnership, especially in the rural pockets of India? Actually, I am not too sure about whether the district mental health programs or the national mental health program talks about public, partnerships, private-public partnerships, but I'm sure there is bound to be, because in a population like ours, it cannot function solely on the systems that the government provides. Now, of course, what the program states is that there has to be a certain number of psychiatrists, there has to be a certain number of psychologists and stuff like that at the district level. But when you go to a district hospital in an OPD there, you would know what it means. When you go to a tertiary healthcare center, you would know what it means. So having it on paper and actually, implementing it and then monitoring it and then seeing the impact are completely different. So there needs to be a public-private partnership, because without which you cannot function. How are you going to provide help to so many people? How are you going to provide? Where are you going to get the psychiatrist from? Where are you going to get the psychologist from? Right? You can't rely on one psychiatrist sitting in a small town somewhere in Madhya Pradesh to cater to, let's say, whatever 10 districts. You can't do that. How is it possible? And then let's suppose there is diagnosis of, let's say, 10% of the population and severe mental illness diagnosis. How are you going to treat them?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what the NGOs also comes in, because there is the NGO partnerships. There's a lot of NGOs actually work in the field of mental health, and I think much more than the private sector.
Yes. And a lot of them currently are struggling with funding and finances. So yes, there are good programs running actually through NGO partnerships, and there has to be. I personally do know a couple of programs that are running at the district level, but the outreach is very less. I'm sure most government programs include private sector partnerships and, of course, NGO and social sector partnerships, because they cannot function without it. They can't reach. The outreach has to be there, right? So there's a lot happening in trainings of community mental health workers, ward workers, or Anganwadis and all in terms of mental health. But the impact have been seen in very, very small pockets. It's not being implemented at the national mental health level or at the state mental health level. They are doing it with one state is doing a pilot with one organization. It's happening like that. So are you going to make this part of your system and run it as part of the system? That's the challenge.
Yeah. And also there isn't much proper evaluation as to how it actually works in terms of how the operationalization of it and how effective it is, and what kind of help, qualitative or other stuff, in terms of how people have managed to have bettered from that, and the kind of support mechanisms of inexperienced
so there are very few
supports as well. Yes.
There are very few where the impact has been studied over a long time. Also, because where is the money in mental health research in India? Who is doing the research? So who are doing this project? Very few people. Very few. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. And there are a couple of them only who are doing these pilot projects, but they're doing it, as I said, as part of the state of partnership with state authorities. But those projects have been tested. They have been implemented. They are going on, but very few are going on, right? And unless you make it part of your system, unless you make it part of your policy, and when I say part of your policy, not on paper, actual implementation and then monitoring and then evaluation and impact, right?
Yeah.
So on paper, everything looks nice.
Okay. Thank you. We have another question from Sanjeevani Goswami. Nowadays, there's a therapy called past life regression, which is used on trauma, addiction, and other issues. Do you think it's based on the belief and not scientific enough?
I do. It is based on the belief and not scientific enough. And I can say that because I'm trained in that, and I did practice that, and I left it because I realized that it's not working. There is no scientific evidence to it, and it is really on belief, because there is no typical methodology to assess the evidence and the efficacy of the therapy. There is no model to do that, right? And a lot of the times, someone who's had trauma or abuse or whatever comes devastated post the therapy, right? Because there is no in most psychotherapies, there is heavy research evidence based on why someone is saying what they are saying, There is an entire system around understanding the beliefs around it and how you modify that. And look at anything. Look at the concept of shema shema focused therapy. Look at the concept of CBT or REBT, or when there was no CBT, it was CT and BT, and how it came together. Look at now mindfulness based therapies. Look at ACT. Look at DBT. They are all very, very heavily research based, that if this is the protocol you're using, this is the most likely outcome if you follow these steps. These therapies like Pasa do not have that. Okay. And psychologists, yes, are learning that, but so many non-psychologists are learning that. So they don't know about trauma. They don't know how trauma changes the body and the brain. They don't know the connection between, the somatic and how it is psychosomatic. They have a concept around psychosomatic, but they don't know, they don't know how your brain wiring changes with trauma. Yeah, right? So, very long answer again, but I think I had to.
Thank you for that. We have another question from Usha, talking about India is a collective society where emotional and social support is very much integrated. Can the strength of our nation culture be used for enhancing mental health? I thought that's the whole point of what we're trying to do.
Yes, that's the whole point of the conversation that we've been having. Yeah.
Yes.
Let's use this.
Yes. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you were saying, please carry on.
Yeah. So I think this is actually, that's the whole point, because that's how we incorporate that cultural belief systems and how we incorporate that into the kind of therapeutic modalities, and also enabling people to be more aware of things, enabling professionals and therapists to be more aware about the culture as well, and how to use the cultural models and cultural psychological models.
I'll give a small example to make this better. So, like you rightly said, we thrive on our social support system. Okay. Now, this was my personal conversation with somebody. I was talking about depression, and they said, "Hamare jaise, in homes like ours, we don't have depression." Okay. Now, this person had their first cousin who died by suicide. Right. Of course, a mental health issue. Only if they knew the signs, only if they acknowledged it, she might have got help at the right time, and she could have been saved. Right? Now, where support is imperative, the idea of this ideal family vis-a-vis the inability to have any mental health issue, of course, is inaccurate, and it is a dysfunctional belief. But if you use the family system and you educate them about mental health and identifying the signs and symptoms and how to be supportive, you're done. You're not just lowering the stigma. You're providing them a safe space. You're providing them a safe space. You're opening doors for conversation. You are fostering help-seeking behavior. You're encouraging help-seeking behavior, and you're also helping them seek the right kind of therapy. Right? So it's a lot of things that's happening together. If we just change the narrative, improve our conversations, and have more people talking about mental health, including therapists.
Yes.
A lot of the therapists don't talk about mental health. They talk about therapy.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's where there is a context as well in terms of how an Indian systems of therapy might also be very important, because I think everybody follows the Western models, and I think there is a lot of substance and a lot of strength in the Indian systems, and how we try and bring that together, how we blend it together is an important concept here.
True, absolutely true.
Okay. So another point that was actually in terms of from Preeti Kapoor, talking about from what I know of, there's a gap between the policy and the field. And I think the CSR funding has dried up. Anyway, so that's the kind of key points that people are actually talking about. So
Yeah.
If there are any more questions, please do raise the questions in the Q&A chat box, please. But I think, taking the point further in terms of the bringing the strength of India into the therapeutic models, can we spend a bit of time on that as to how the Indian systems might actually work, how we can incorporate them together? Because they requires, like CBT requires a kind of cultural adaptation in relation to the individual, the community that we actually work with, etc. So how can kind of an Indian system, how can there be an Indian way of actually looking at some of those therapeutic modalities? Are there any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think a great Indian way of looking at it is to look at the family system where the person is coming from. Right? I always go back to the family, the structure of the family. Okay, which religion are they from? It doesn't directly influence it, but it might influence the practices at home, the gender role at home, and therefore the mental health conditions at home, and therefore the and this I'm saying not out of any bias or anything, but because it's all part of the human experience, right? So you cannot take it out of context. Okay. And then when you're using therapy, sometimes include family in it too, because family is a part of their progress. They're part of the trigger system. They're part also of their, whether you call it treatment, whether you call it prognosis, whether you call it diagnosis, or whether you call it recovery, whatever you call it. It's part of their human experience. So you cannot dissociate with them, because understand that mental health problems or going through mental health issues can be very isolating. Because there is such huge stigma, often enough, family doesn't know that they're seeking therapy. So you have to keep that in mind, right? And when we look at Indian system, what is Indian system? It's not just one thing. I cannot say that, okay, this is Indian system. No. So there are systems. There is a system of religion. There is a system of caste. There is a system of ethnicity. There is a system, whether you're urban, rural, whether within the urban, are you in a semi-urban rural setting, right? Which region of India do you belong to? Because your geography plays a huge role in how your livelihood is and how your family system is. What kind of work do you do, right? And what kind of a community setting do you have? And again, what kind of politics are you part of? And I always bring politics, because politics and governance make policy, right? Again, one of my goals is actually to take PMFHA to the panchayat. You take this to panchayat, and at least the gaons are taken care of. You make the heads of the panchayat literate around this, and actually literate, not just okay, training kara di, right? You know that okay, some part of the village is taken care of, right? So all of this is the Indian system, right? So you have to look at it from that perspective, and I can bring that we have this huge shortcoming, not just in terms of the number of therapists that we have, but we are studying the Western philosophies and everything, but we're not being taught how to incorporate that, to look at it from this model, to have that sensitivity. That sensitivity, I think, and this I can say from my own experience and from everybody that I talk to, comes from a therapist's growth as a human being, and whether they have taken therapy or not. What kind of a family system they come from? How gender sensitive are they? How politically sensitive? How economically sensitive are they? Right? And maybe the young ones today are more part of the mental health narrative. When I was in training room, I was growing up, I wasn't, and that's sad. And the people before me surely haven't, because when I speak with a lot of them, I feel very, very sorry. Right? Maybe they didn't have the avenues. Maybe there wasn't enough research or conversations around it. I don't blame them, but I feel sorry that we have done enough within the mental health service sector in India.
Okay.
It's booming. It's booming right now. People are getting on the bandwagon to make a lot of money out of it, but there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of just education and improving the help seeking.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. I think that is very important. I think in terms of especially the young people, in terms of the younger generation, growing more with mental health literacy awareness.
Yes.
And also, and then it's actually equipping them to with the resources that require for them to actually access help and support, because there is no standardized model here. We can only provide, we can only signpost different pathways here, and it is up to the individual to actually access those things. It is not like the other kind of, take this tablet, it will go away. It's not as simple as that.
Yes, and also over a couple of years, I've become a huge supporter of community-based training models. That there are multiple kind of community-based mental health models. There is the literacy bit where you are just disseminating information. Then there is the help model that once you provide the mental health literacy, you're also equipping them to provide help. And there are multiple ways in which people have developed this model. There's Atmita model. There is Sangat has 3-4 studies in different settings. In the maternal mental health care, they've done with community health workers within the healthcare system, right? They tested it in Goa. They're doing it in Madhya Pradesh with, I think, either Anganwadi workers or community health workers. They're working on substance abuse and depression, right? So they're focused on depression and substance abuse. But that's what I'm saying, that they can be part of the mental health treatment model within the Indian policy and how they're disseminating it. We have such amazing network of community health workers and Anganwadis and the ward workers and the panchayat. It is amazing. We can do wonders, right?
Yes.
We can do wonders, and we are equipped. We can do it. There is a whole lot of planning. There's going to be a whole lot of monitoring. There's a whole lot of systems to be put together to be able to make this into a robust infrastructure to say that no, now our national mental health policy and our state mental health policies are going to have this as part of the program, apart from what we've been doing to cater to them. And you can do it.
Yes, I think it's actually understanding the diversity in the particular models, because there is no one model that fits all. Because I think the issue is we look at one model that fits all, because there isn't anything like that.
There isn't anything like that. So if you have, let's say, a project has been developed, let's say by Sangat for maternal mental health, it's a peer support help model that they have created, the training they've created, the research, there is enough efficacy. I am not sure if it has, the impact study has been completed or not, but it was done in Nepal and I think parts of Bihar, if I'm not mistaken. Nepal, I'm sure. Bihar, I'm not unsure. Now, why can we not use that for tribals in Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh or parts of Odisha, or I'm just giving random geography, but I'm just saying the idea of using it.
Yes.
So, okay, now if I'm a training person, right? If you are a training person, you can be on board this project. Sangat is a research organization. They do research. They make the model. They make it applicable. They study if it is applicable or not, or applicable or not. That's their job done, right? You have the evidence. Do it.
Yes. Yeah. I think it is. I think it's how people getting the policymakers and the communities together and trying to understand that thing really in terms of how
I like how we are building on hope, and we are probably ending the session on hope.
Yeah, I think hope is everything. I think without hope there is nothing. So I think it's how that would actually happen one day. I think even in pockets of it. And I think one of the things that I do actually find within the Indian context is, there are a lot of organizations. There are a lot of organizations like Sangat and many other organizations working within the field of mental health. But I think you're just getting the kind of, what works, what works
What
best,
works?
and
Yeah,
what works best in what community. And I think he's getting
yeah,
that information to the wider masses in terms of policy making, in terms of how to be tweaked in different states, different communities, etc. And I think that need to be happening.
yeah. Also, I think uh, I always follow this. Something is better than nothing. Okay, you follow one model to say that okay, something is workable, something you're doing. You build from that rather than you try to build something new for everybody. That will take years. That will take a lot of funding. That will take a lot of effort. That will take a lot of research. You can build from there. You can make changes from there, right? But you can replicate what's already happening and then see what the efficacy is and tweak it as per the language, as per the geography, as per the need. It's just, you know, just having
Yes.
something is better than having nothing.
Yes, exactly. And I think so. I think it's trying to look at the diversity of approaches and look at the merits and strengths of those approaches rather than criticizing each other. Each approach has got a strength, and they might actually have some weaknesses as well. But look at the strengths, and I think it
Yeah.
is time. It is time that the mental health services moved away from the deficit-based model of services and more into the kind of strength-based model
Yeah.
of services.
Yes, I like that you said from deficit we need to move to strength because deficits are always going to be there. You'll always find something or the other not working, but there's something which is working, right?
Yes. Yeah. And also people's strength as well, bringing the community together, bringing the people together, their cultural beliefs and everything else together into the kind of mode. It actually enables a person to grow stronger, rather than take it away, take it all apart, and only just see a symptom. And I think that doesn't hold very well
It
in
doesn't.
terms of the
It
context.
it doesn't because then you know for you as a psychologist, as a clinical psychologist, then no, I'm a counseling psychologist, so I wouldn't look at symptoms, but I will look at it, but I will not just look at symptoms, right? Uh, so uh, uh, so as a clinical psychologist or as a psychiatrist, who would come to you if you do not look at culture, if you do not look at their background, if you do not look at their belief system, they will not come to you, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They come to you when they think that there is no hope, that they cannot handle a person, that there is something so wrong, or where they have been misdiagnosed for years together, where they have. So I have no problem when one looks at symptoms because obviously that's part of the treatment. You have to. But I have a problem when they only look at symptoms, when they don't look at the development of the systems or the symptoms or maintenance of it, and also where this person is going to get the treatment from. Let's say that you are looking at symptoms, but is the treatment accessible? Where is they going to get the medicine? Where are they going to get the therapy from? Is therapy affordable for them? Do you
Yeah.
have that as part of your system to be able to give that person therapy, right? So, yes, but you cannot negate mental illness as part of the mental health aspect, but that's not the only aspect, and that's important to understand, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
idea that yes, a full blown depression uh, can be prevented, or suicide can sometimes be prevented,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
I think, yeah, it is. It is how we can work. We need to work with the policy context and also the wider narratives and diversity of approaches that might be actually happening, and seeing what works. More small scale research in relation to some more how those therapeutic modalities will actually work, cultural adaptations of those therapies, and also how culturally competent the therapists are, and actually in exploring some of those
Yeah.
concepts is very important.
Yeah. Therapeutic skills of therapists is another story. The kind of education that we receive is another story, and how much we have to years we have to spend in training ourselves is another story for another time.
Yeah. So let me draw this to a close in relation to, it's been an excellent discussion with you, and we covered a number of very valid, including the policy points in terms of the how the culture is a key factor, both in terms of how the person constructs their narrative and how they report those to the therapist or other professionals, and how the family environment is actually very important in this kind of context, and also how employers and the whole field of employment and how they need to be very responsive to helping their employees in creating a safe space, and also providing much more intense support and help as and when required. So I think there is also the kind of the strength of the Indian ways of actually looking things in terms of its culture, in terms of the belief systems, and how that could be absorbed into the therapeutic modalities, which I'm sure many people are actually doing. But I think you just get making it more popular in relation to its effectiveness, and how it might be more helpful for people in many rural communities or urban communities or tribal communities, etc. So I think it's been a pleasure talking to you, to explore some of those concepts, and I think this is just the first bit of conversation that we have. I'm sure we'll go into some of those elements much more deeper, maybe in a different context. So it's been my pleasure to, thank you very much for coming on board, and thank you very much for having an honest and frank discussion about the therapeutic modalities and the policy issues, and some of the ways in which we can better with the help and support without having too much financial resources, and how we can tweak it and build on the existing strengths, etc. So it's been a pleasure, Signa, to actually talk to you and for your views on this theme. So many thanks for coming on board with all the viewers. The program will be recorded and be streamed on Facebook as well as a recorded version. So please do follow us on MeHeLP Facebook page and MeHeLP Twitter pages. So be interactive. And I know this is a difficult times in many states in India because of COVID. So our thoughts are with you, and keep well, keep safe, think positive. I mean, think positive in the best sense of the word, so that things will get better sooner. And I think it's important that we visualize beyond the COVID context. Life has to go on, but I think we have to visualize beyond the COVID context and try and see how mental health, how we can help people with mental health narratives, and also how can we mainstream mental health conversations in the wider the Indian context. So thank you once again, and speak to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Stay safe,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.